Hey everybody, Mr. B here. This is a quick helper video with something that we struggled on today. This is a hard topic to teach because students either know this really well or they don't know it really well at all. And so you got half of the class that's done early because they really understand how this works, and half of the class that's really stuck. So it's a hard topic to teach, and I just want to put this out there, and maybe it'll help some of the students that need it. If you're going to take decimals and turn them into fractions, it's all about place value. So I'm going to look at this first example of 0.8, and you just need to know place value in order to do this correctly. This is the ones place, this is the tenths place. So if there is an 8 in the tenths place, you are dealing with 8 tenths. Likewise, if you had an 8 that's in the hundredths place, then your denominator would be 100 instead of 10. So it's all about place value. If you had an 8 in the thousandths place, the next place over, your denominator would be 1,000. So in that first example, we don't have an 8 in the hundredths place, we have an 8 in the tenths place, so we're dealing with 8 tenths. The directions say not just to express it as a fraction, but to do it in simplest form. So here is where a lot of students struggle, is with simplifying fractions. And so we gave them divisibility rules in their journal today to let them know, like, hey, how do I know if I can keep dividing this down and making it smaller? And one thing we said, if they're both even numbers, then you can always divide them by 2. Since 8 and 10 are even numbers, you can divide them both by 2. And then obviously 8 divided by 2 is 4, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. These are not both even numbers, and you can't divide them by 2. You can divide 5 by 5, but you can't divide 4 by 5. You can divide 4 by 2, but you can't divide 5 by 2. And this is just really where students get stuck. I'll have tons of students that try to divide these by 2 again because they're generalizing and saying, well, I divided it by 2 once, so I must do it again. There's a lot of students that don't know when to stop, when it's simplified all the way, and that comes from knowing your math multiplication facts. Students who struggle with simplifying fractions struggle because they don't know division. They don't know division because they don't know their math multiplication facts. So it's, once again, math multiplication facts are a big help to simplifying fractions. Let's look at one like 32 hundredths. This is the tenths place, this is the hundredths place, so we're talking about a fraction that has 100 as the denominator. You need to see if it can be simplified. Hopefully students recognize that they're both even numbers again, so in this case you could divide by 2. You could divide by more than 2 in this case. A lot of students don't recognize this, but you could, so I'll show both ways. If you recognize that 32 can be divided by 4 and that 100 can also be divided by 4, you would only have one step, because 8 times 4 is 32, so 32 divided by 4 is 8, and 25 times 4 is 100, so 100 divided by 4 is 25. So that you could do it in one step if you recognize that. I would say less than half of my 6th graders this year recognize that. Most of them see that they can divide by 2, which is fine. If they need to do it that way, it's going to be 16 over 50, but they'll just need to know they're not finished. Just because they did this once, they're not finished. They need to recognize they're still even numbers, so they can still divide and simplify this fraction even smaller. Okay? Now, as a parent, you're going to be frustrated and go, why? Why do they have to simplify fractions? What's the point? Why would they have to do that? And the reason why is because they're never going to get, this is never going to be this easy in 6th grade. It's going to be a word problem. It's going to have tons of words in it. It's going to say something like this. Mr. B has some students in his classroom, and 32 hundredths of the students are paying attention. And then the question might be something like this. What fraction in simplest form represents 32 hundredths? Well, 8/25 is going to be the right answer choice because it's in simplest form. One of the answer choices that might be listed might be 16 over 50, which is equal to that, but it's not in simplest form. 32 over 100 might be listed, but it's not the correct answer because it's not in simplest form. So if the question says simplest form, the student needs to not pick something that's just equal, but something that is completely in simplest form. So all of these work the same. If it's in the tenths place, the denominator is a 10. If it's in the hundredths place, the denominator is 100. If it goes to the thousands place, which none of these examples do, the denominator is obviously 1,000. When you have some that have whole numbers with them, so we're going to look at a couple examples here. 7, 8, and 9 all have whole numbers. You can kind of, it's still about place value. That's all it is. You still have an 8 in the tenths place, so you have 8 tenths. But you don't have 0 with it, you have 5 with it. So you have a mixed fraction or a mixed number, 5 and 8 tenths. Okay? Now, the 8 tenths portion can be simplified. The whole number is just along for the ride, so just bring it with you. Okay? But you can divide 8 by 2 to get 4, and you can divide 10 by 2 to get 5. So simplified, 5 and 8 tenths simplifies to 5 and 4/5. You just bring the whole number along with you. You don't need to do anything with it. Another example, 12 and 5/100ths. Same idea. The decimal place value gives it away. You have a 5 in the hundredths place, so you have 5 over 100, and then the whole number 12 is just going to go right beside it. If you need to simplify, the 12 whole number is going to come along for the ride. 5 and 100 are both divisible by 5, so 5 divided by 5 is 1. 100 divided by 5 is 20, so the simplified version is 12 and 1/20. So that's how it works with mixed numbers, or that's how it works when you have something other than 0 in the whole number place value. Alright, so that's taking decimals to fractions with a few examples. The other way around would be taking fractions and going to decimals. And here's what I tell students in 6th grade. All fractions are division problems. If you can say 1 over 8, you can say 1 divided by 8. The problem is students want to do this, 1 divided by 8 like that, and that couldn't be more wrong. This is not 1 divided by 8. This is 8 divided by 1. Okay? You can't set it up that way. If you do, you're going to get the wrong answer every single time. Okay? It has to be set up correctly. 1 is under the division bracket, 8 is on the outside, because 1 is the number that you're dividing. Okay? All kinds of strategies for division have been taught from the time they were in 4th grade and 5th grade, so I always have to kind of see what they've been taught in the past, but this is kind of how I teach it. 8 is not going to go into 1, so we know immediately that we're going to be dealing with a decimal, and we can place as many zeros as we need. In this case, we only need 1 0 because we're going to treat this as 10 now, even though it's really 1.0, but 8 will go into 10. So before I get too carried away, I'm going to copy my decimal point up to my answer bar. 8 will go into 10 once. 1 times 8 is 8. 10 minus 8 is 2. 8 doesn't go into 2, so I'm going to bring down another 0. 8 goes into 20 twice. 2 times 8 is 16. 20 minus 16 is 4. 8 doesn't go into 4, so I can bring down another 0. 8 goes into 40 exactly 5 times. 8 times 5 is 40, no remainder. So the decimal of 1/8 is 0.125. You can do this with any fraction. To find out what the decimal is, just divide it. All fractions are division problems, every single one. Okay? Another thing that you can do sometimes that is helpful is just knowing the word tenths again. 7 tenths. We used this a minute ago when we were going the other way. 8 tenths. If there is an 8 in the tenths place, then the denominator is a 10, 8 over 10. So if this says 7 tenths, that means there needs to be a 7 in the tenths place, which is right here. So if you recognize that, you might not even have to do the division. If you need to, you can take 7 and divide it by 10, and you're going to get that answer if you do your division correctly. Okay. One other strategy that's really helpful, but it really only helps if you already understand equivalent fractions. If you have something like 11 over 20 and you recognize, hey, I can get this denominator to equal 100 very quickly, then that can be a time saver. You might recognize that 20 times 5 is equal to 100. So if you multiply 11 times 5, you're going to get 55 over 100. And there's your place value again. This means the hundredths place. So here's your ones, here's your decimal point, here's your tenths, here's your hundredths. You have 55 hundredths, so you need to go 55 to the hundredths place, 0.55. Okay? That only works with denominators that you can easily get to 100, or that you can get to 10 if you're just dealing with the tenths place. Once again, if you don't see the relationship with equivalent fractions, you can always take the numerator 11 and divide it by the denominator of 20, and you're going to get 0.55 if you do it that way as well. Students make mistakes in long division, so that's why we try to teach them equivalent fractions. There's far less mistakes made when we use equivalent fractions than there is in division. One more example, you can have mixed numbers that you have to change. So here's 1 3/8, 2 3/10, 6 3/5. Some of these are really easy, like 16, 2 3/10. That means 2 in the ones place and a 3 in the tenths place. So just if you know place value, you can convert that without really having to do much at all. Let's look at one though that might not be quite as easy, like this one here, 6 3/5. So we got 6 3/5. We want to turn it into a decimal. Okay, well, a whole number of 6, that's 6 ones. So you're going to have 6 point something. That 3/5 is this fractional or decimal piece that's going to come after the 6 decimal point. So we're going to hold on, we're going to just wait on the 6 for a minute. We're going to pretend it's not there. We're just going to treat it like 3/5. Okay? One way to do that, come over here to the side, one way to do that is to go, hey, I see this 3/5. I see easily that 5 times 2 equals 10. So 3 times 2 equals 6. That's 6 tenths, which is another 6 in the tenths place. So 6.6. Or if you don't see that, you can take 3, you can divide it by 5. Okay? 5 does not go into 3, so you're going to need a decimal point and a 0. 5 goes into 30 6 times. 6 times 5 is 30. Subtract, no remainder. So you can get your 6 tenths from an equivalent fraction. You can get your 6 tenths from dividing 3 by 5. And then remember, you didn't have just 3/5, you had 6 3/5. So you need to take that 0.6 and put your 6 ones back in there to make it 6.6. Now that doesn't really make sense because 3 divided by 5 is not 6.6, but hopefully you see where I'm getting that 6 from to put it back when I'm done. So anyway, this is going to work for every single fraction on this page. There are some students that took some of these home to finish for homework. Some of them finished all of them. It just takes a lot of practice to get this. I hope this video helps, and hope you can watch it over and over again as you need to so that you can get faster at this.